Hello everyone. In this video, we will see what is environmental impact assessment, what are the steps involved in environmental impact assessment, history of EIA, when the EIA was introduced in world and how did it evolve. We will see history of EIA in India when EIA was introduced in India and down the years how it has evolved. We will see EIA 2006 rules, we will see EIA 2020 draft rules, and finally we will conclude. So stay till the last. So environmental impact assessment is a process of predicting the environmental impact a proposed or existing project can have. Now, this assessment involves series of systematic steps which can evaluate the potential environmental impact. These steps can vary depending on country to country. Since we are based in India, we will talk with respect to India. So let's see what are the steps which is involved in EIA. First is screening. Screening means deciding whether an industry requires EIA or not. The rules in India categorizes industries based on their capacity, based on their pollution production capacity, and hence the categories are the industries are categorized as category A or category B, and category B is subsequently categorized as B1 and B2, and depending on whether the industry requires an EIA or not, that is the first step which takes place, that is called as screening. After screening, suppose an industry is found that it requires EIA, that it produces pollution in considerable amount, then EIA is required. So the second step is scoping. Scoping means defining all the terms, all the boundary line conditions over which the environmental impact assessment for that particular project has to be carried out. It involves identifying the stakeholders and consulting with them to gather input and concerns. Then the third step is baseline data collection, which involves collecting the data for existing water conditions, air conditions, solid waste conditions, biodiversity, or socio-economic factors, such as if some labor or some people reside in the particular area where the project is proposed, so their social condition, the economic conditions, that will be collected, because it is obvious that if a project is proposed in particular area, and in that particular area if some people reside, then their condition, then they will be affected by that project, so those conditions also need to be addressed, and hence the baseline data collection involves collecting that data, the socio-economic data also. Impact prediction, then based on the data collected and based on the processes which is involved in the proposed project or existing industry, its impact is predicted. How much impact it will have on the environment, how much wastewater it will generate, what will be its impact, how much air pollution it will do, what will be its impact, is there any people, is there any public residing nearby the industry or the proposed project, and how, if yes, then how they will be impacted. All these predictions are made in the step of impact prediction. This impact prediction can have positive as well as negative impacts. All those impacts are listed down. Now mitigation and alternative analysis. Now when you find that there are negative impacts of a proposed project, then mitigation options, alternatives are suggested for those points, and accordingly the processes or the steps in the proposed project needs to be changed so that the negative impacts are mitigated. You can sometimes you can give alternatives options also. Then the report is prepared for EIA, which is prepared by expert team, a comprehensive report which includes all the detailed information, the baseline data which was collected, the impact predictions made, and the alternative solutions which were given. Then public consultation. So public consultation is an important part of EIA, and The report, which is EIA report, which was prepared, is made available to public, and the people which are affected by proposed project are called for public consultation. The people can put forward their views, their concerns, and that needs to be taken into account while making decision for the proposed project. So finally, the regulatory authority, it reviews the EIA report, the comments received in public consultation, and the experts' recommendations, and based on that, a decision is made whether to grant or deny the environmental clearance to proposed project. If environmental clearance is provided to the proposed project, there are certain conditions which are mentioned which needs to be specified, and those conditions such as monitoring and reporting and compliance with mitigation measures, those things have to be carried out by the proponent of the project. So post clearance monitoring and auditing. So once the clearance has been granted to the proponent for the project, it's the regular monitoring and auditing has to be carried out by the proponent. Some of the states in India have made mandatory for the projects to carry out audits. Then a regular report is provided to public and stakeholders on the environmental impact or environmental performance of the project. So after environmental clearance has been granted, if down the lane, if some years or some months later it is found that the project or the processes in industry is not following up with the recommendations made, if it is not following up with the uh, modifications which are required, or then there has to be modification on the project, or even at the worst case there can be termination for the project. So environmental impact assessment is a comprehensive and iterative one which enables development while safeguarding the environment and involving public and stakeholders in decision making. The exact requirements and steps of EIA may vary country to country and regulatory framework. So this is what EIA was. Now let's see history of EIA. When did EIA started? So in the during early 1960s, the EIA was introduced as a concern about environmental pollution, and resource depletion began to emerge in United States. So early practices involved assessing the environmental impact of large infrastructure projects such as large dam or highways, and this was particularly in western countries. So in 1970, United States, it introduced National Environmental Policy Act (NEPA) in 1970, which formalized the concept of EIA. Now, since United States was a developed country, was a leader in world, since NEPA or National Environmental Policy Act of 1970, USA made it mandatory for federal agencies to prepare environmental impact assessment of major federal projects and set the stage for global adoption of EIA principles. Now, since US started adopting EIA, it inspired other developed countries in the world to follow the system, and hence countries such as Canada, Australia, and European countries started implementing EIA procedures in 1970s and 1980s. Then came United Nations Conference on Human Environment in 1972, which emphasized the need for considering environmental aspects in decision making. So this was under United Nations Conference on Human Earth in Stockholm in 1972 was the first conference which emphasized the need for environmental impact assessment. Subsequently, the multilateral development banks such as World Bank began requiring EIA for projects they fund, and hence now World Bank is a leading bank which gives money to the developing nations for their big projects. Now, when the World Bank will ask that they need EIA for any project, then subsequently the developing countries will have to ultimately adopt the process of carrying EIA, and hence, like this way, EIA started to be carried out in every country of world. International standards. The United Nations Economic Commission for Europe established the guidelines for EIA in 1985. Then the International Association for Impact Assessment was formed in 1980, and that played a significant role in advancing EIA practices and standards. Then there was Rio Declaration, the Earth Summit held in 1992, and it led to adoption of Rio Declaration, which stressed upon the importance of EIA in sustainable development. And hence, this further promoted the acceptance of EIA by all the countries. So the Agenda 21 of Rio Declaration 1992 had a comprehensive plan of action called for the widespread use of EIA, and with internationalization and customization. Now EIA continued to evolve as countries around the world tailored EIA processes to their specific needs and challenges. So now, since the World Bank and different United Nations conferences such as Rio conferences emphasized upon EIA, now every country had started implementing environmental impact assessment before granting environmental clearance to any new project, and each country tailored the EIA processes according to their needs, but uh, it was not uniform throughout all the countries, but it was common that all the countries now started emphasizing on environmental impact assessment. Further, the international agreements such as Aarhus Convention or EPSO Convention emphasize public participation in EIA processes, and this introduced the concept of public participation while carrying out environmental impact assessment, which is an important step. Participation of public in environmental impact assessment is an important aspect because ultimately the people living in vicinity of a project are the ones which are affected most, and hence their participation in a project while making decision is important. So ongoing advances is that EIA has continued to evolve in response to changing environmental challenges, technical advancements, and a growing global awareness of environmental sustainability. Throughout these years, the rules and regulations pertaining to EIA has changed, has evolved with respect to time, with respect to technological advancement, and the awareness about environmental sustainability. Some countries now have incorporated strategic environmental assessment in their planning processes to assess the policies, plans, and programs. Today, EIA is a standard practice in many countries and plays a vital role in ensuring that the development projects are carried out with a thorough understanding of their environmental impact and with efforts to mitigate or offset those impacts. It remains an essential tool for achieving sustainable development and protecting the environment. So this was all about environmental impact assessment about the world. Now coming to EIA in India. When did EIA was introduced in India? So EIA was introduced in India in 1970s. As informed, during 1970s, the global efforts such as United Nations, World Bank, all those started emphasizing on EIA, and hence India was also one of the country which introduced environmental impact assessment in early 1970s to address the environmental concerns. So then came the Environmental Protection Act of 1986, which is also called as Umbrella Act, which was a significant milestone in environment development. In the development of EIA in India, it laid the foundation for environmental protection in the country. The EPA 1986 introduced Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, which was to regulate and oversee the environmental matters. Then came the first formal EIA notification issued in 1994, and this made mandatory for any proposed project to obtain environmental clearance for certain projects. That depends on the category of project that we will see in coming slides. So the EIA notification 1994 said there were two categories of industries, category A and category B. Category A were the industries which required clearance from central government. Category B was those industries which required clearance from state level environmental authorities. Now, the category A and category B differentiated in terms of their capacity, in terms of their production capacity, in terms of their pollution producing capacity. If there is a big industry, or there were many rules laid down, such as if an industry is located at the boundary of two states, or if the capacity of industry is very big, then there are many such conditions. So those countries, those industries require uh, clearance from central government, and hence they were covered in category A. Other than those with a small capacity, and they are particularly in a within a one state, which are not in, which does not lie in the uh, ecological sites or forest, those industries needed to have environmental clearance from state level environmental authorities. So over the years, EIA notification has gone under several amendments, such as EIA 2006 rules came, then EIA 2020 draft rules came. The EIA notification 2006 was a significant amendment because it introduced the provision for public consultation. And as I mentioned previously, public consultation is an important aspect of EIA. And also, the 2006 rule increased the number of projects which required clearance and enhanced the monitoring and compliance mechanisms. So, EIA 2006 rules made a lot of changes. Then, public participation was introduced, which is a crucial component for EIA process in India. It provides an opportunity for local communities and stakeholders to voice their concerns and opinions regarding proposed project. Public hearings were organized by project proponents and are an essential step in public consultation project. Regional impact assessment was emphasized by India. India recognized the importance of considering regional and cumulative environmental impact. Projects that have cumulative impacts are now assessed in context of their impact on the entire region. So EIA India faced many criticism over issues such as transparency of decision making, quality of EIA reports, and the effectiveness of post clearance monitoring. All the rules, all the regulations laid down or discussed so far yet looks very good on paper, but when you go on the field level, all these things are not reflected 100%, and hence there are very criticism that they lack transparency in decision making. The quality of reports are not up to the mark. It does not cover all the predicted impact, and the effectiveness of post clearance monitoring is not strong enough. So these are some of the criticisms faced by EIA. Controversies have arisen in relation to specific projects, and concerns about potential dilution of environmental regulation have been raised. So, the draft EIA 2020 notification aimed to further streamline the process and enhance environmental governance. However, it faced criticism for environmentalists and activists who expressed concerns about weakening environmental protections. We will see what happened in EIA draft notification 2020 rules. So the draft EIA notification 2020 proposed changes in various aspects, including post facto clearance, but it was met with mixed reactions because there were many people which favored the draft notification 2020. However, there were many more people who opposed the draft EIA 2020 notifications. So the EIA in India has come a long way since its inception, and it continues to evolve in response to environmental challenges, changing regulations, and public demand for transparency and accountability. It plays a vital role in ensuring that the development in India is sustainable and minimizes its impact on the environment. So the draft notification to the EIA notification 2006. This is not draft notification. This is the EIA notification 2006. It was a significant amendment to existing EIA framework, introducing several key points and provisions. What are those key points? Let's see. So the projects were categorized into two categories, A and B. I have already discussed what are category A projects and what are category B projects. Simply, the category A projects required clearance from central government, while the category B project required clearance from state level environmental impact assessment authorities. The 2006 notification also made the public consultation a mandatory requirement for category B, category A, and some of the category B projects. Another aspect was public hearings were conducted to allow local communities and stakeholders to express their concerns and opinions about the proposed projects. 2006 notification also introduced the concept of terms of reference. Terms of reference defined the scope and content of EIA report that the project proponents were required to prepare. So terms of reference basically uh, summarizes the terms, the points over which environmental impact assessment has to be carried out. Terms of reference is crucial for ensuring that all the relevant environmental aspects are adequately addressed in EIA, and hence TOR is an important aspect. If by chance any important point is missed in TOR, it won't be covered completely in EIA, and hence TOR is an important aspect. The EIA report was to be prepared by accredited consultants. Now, EIA 2006 notification made it that the EIA report has to be prepared by accredited consultants and needed to include information on the project, its potential environmental impact, mitigation measures, and the environmental management plan. The 2006 notification set the criteria for granting or denying environmental clearance for the projects. It set some criteria based on which either a project is granted or denied environmental clearance. The clearance process involved scrutiny by expert appraisal committee and the submission of recommendations to regulatory authorities. Expert appraisal committee will do the scrutiny of the environmental clearance, whether the environmental clearance has to be given to a proposed project or not. Based on their recommendations, the regulatory authorities finally take decision whether to give environmental clearance or not. So post clearance monitoring was introduced. Projects were required to implement and adhere to conditions set in the environmental clearance, including monitoring and reporting on environmental impacts throughout the project's life cycle. Expansion of project categories. The notification expanded the list of projects which required environmental clearance, bringing more development activities under regular scrutiny. Before 2006, there were limited number of industries which required environmental clearance, which required environmental impact assessment. However, post EIA 2006 rules, the number of industries were increased, the list of projects requiring environmental clearance were increased, and now more number of development activities required the regulatory scrutiny. Appraisal and approval process. The projects were subjected to a rigorous appraisal processes with expert appraisal committee conducting a thorough examination of EIA report and recommending whether to grant or deny clearance. Region specific guidelines were introduced. The notification allowed for development of region specific guidelines and criteria to address unique environmental concerns of different areas. The environmental conditions of Rajasthan will be different from those of Northeast. The environmental conditions of Jammu Kashmir will be different those of South India, and hence region specific guidelines were introduced, that region specific guidelines could be implemented for environmental clearance application. Delegation of powers. The 2006 rules delegated the certain powers to state from central government in respect of granting environmental clearance for category B projects. EIA 2006 notification also included provisions for dealing with projects undertaken in emergency, ensuring that they could proceed without prior clearance but with post facto assessment. The EIA notification 2006 aimed to enhance the environmental governance of development projects in India, ensuring that environmental concerns were adequately addressed and mitigated. It introduced greater transparency and public participation, making it a significant step in evolution of India's EIA framework. So let's see what are the draft EIA 2020 rules, which faced a lot of criticism and a mixed reaction from people for draft EIA 2020 rules. So the draft EIA 2020 rules propose to amend and update the existing EIA 2006 framework in India. It introduced several key points and provisions, some of which were met with mixed reactions and controversies. So the first thing was post facto clearance. This was the most controversial aspect of draft EIA 2020 rules because it allowed for certain projects to seek clearance after they had already been initiated or had expanded without obtaining prior clearance. I mean, this completely dilutes the purpose of EIA or environmental clearance. I mean, if an industry has already been started and after that, if you are carrying out the EIA, there's no meaning of EIE then, and hence this was the most controversial aspect that you can obtain environmental clearance after initiating an industry. Reduced public consultation time. Earlier, the minimum 30 days were allowed for public consultation. However, this duration was reduced to 20 days. The problem with reducing the public consultation time is that if you are giving less time, less people will become aware and less people will come forward and put ahead their concerns. So this is in a way of favor of a proponent of project, that less people are putting forward their concerns. That means you have more chances of getting environmental clearance without actually being addressing the concern of people affected. Exemption for specific projects. It notified the draft EIA 2020 notification notified certain projects as exempted from EIA clearance, such as projects for national defense, security, and other strategic concerns, such as projects lying on international borders. These projects were exempted from environmental clearance, and which was really shocking because every project needs environmental clearance irrespective of whether they are located, because ultimately they will have important impact on the environment. Validity of environmental clearance. Now, this draft 2020 EIA notification suggested extending the validity period of environmental clearance for mining projects from 30 years to 50 years. Now, 30 years itself is a big duration. Since this aimed at increasing it to 50 years, it was again concern about for many people that long-term environmental impact would be affected. Ease of compliance. The draft notification 2020 made it easy for complying the requirements. The draft aimed to simplify and streamline the EIA process by reducing the number of documents required for obtaining the environmental clearance. So ultimately, it was uh, it was again in the favor of proponent that it can be the environmental clearance can be obtained easily with less number of documents. Penalties and violations. Provisions were made for penalty for violation of environmental conditions were introduced with penalties ranging from monetary fines to imprisonment. Digitalization and transparency. The draft proposed to promote digitalization and transparency by developing a digital platform for online submission of application and facilitating public access to information. Strategic environmental assessment. The draft notification also included provisions for strategic environmental assessment, which would apply to certain policies, plans, and programs to assess their environmental impact. Clarification and specific criteria. The draft aimed to clarify various aspects of EIA process and set specific criteria for various project categories. Public hearings through video conferencing. Given the increase in the use of technology, the draft suggested conducting public hearing through video conferencing to facilitate participation. Now, frankly speaking, I don't know whether this is a good amendment or a bad amendment, because use of technology is it's good that this can be done, but I feel that when physical presence is over there of people who are affected, it will have more effect. So I don't know. You decide and let me know in comment section whether this is a good step or bad. Then project recategorization was proposed in draft 2020 EIA rules that project can be recategorized, potentially affecting the level of scrutiny and clearance procedures required. Now, suppose a project initially was categorized as A project. Now down the years you are categorizing it as B project. So essentially it will require less scrutiny and less clearance procedures. So this is again this was again accepted with folded hands. Environmental impact assessment training and accreditation was introduced for consultants and institutions involved in preparing EIA reports and conducting impact assessment. So the draft EIA 2020 rules, and it had generated significant amount of public debate and controversy. While many proponents argued that it aimed to streamline the process and promote ease of doing business, there were critics who expressed their concerns that it might weaken environmental protections, reduce transparency, and limit the public participation. Ultimately, environmental impact assessment is an important step for a project, proposed or existing, to be carried out EIA, so that the environment can be protected and sustainability can be achieved. I hope you like this video. If yes, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Thank you.